Hey, Billionaire Soul Stories fam. We've got a swoon-worthy love story for you today. Let's jump in and tell us what city are you watching from. The tall glass walls of Harrington Enterprises gleamed against the early morning sun, their reflections spilling onto the crowded street below. Inside, the air carried the quiet hum of computers, clicking keyboards, and the brisk footsteps of professionals rushing to their desks. It was one of the most powerful corporations in the city, and at the very top of it sat Simon Harrington, the young but formidable CEO. Simon was known for two things: his extraordinary business acumen and his intimidating presence. At only 35, he had turned his father's modest company into a global empire. He was sharp, polished, and impossibly handsome, the kind of man who could silence a room with a single glance. His reputation preceded him: ruthless in negotiations, unemotional in decisions, and distant with his employees. Louisa, however, knew none of this. It was her first day at Harrington Enterprises. She stood in the lobby, clutching her folder of documents against her chest. At 24, she had just graduated with top honors in business administration. Harrington Enterprises had been her dream company for years, though she never imagined she would actually work here. Her nervous excitement showed in her bright eyes and in the way her heels clicked nervously against the marble floor. "Louisa Carter?" A voice called gently. She turned to see a middle-aged woman with glasses and a clipboard. "Yes, that's me," Louisa replied, her voice soft but filled with determination. "Welcome. I'm Clara, the HR manager. Come with me. I'll show you around." As Clara guided her through the sleek, modern office space, Louisa's heart raced. Glass doors opened into open workstations, where employees were already deep in meetings, typing away on laptops or discussing projects. Everyone looked so confident, so professional. Louisa felt like a small bird dropped into a sky full of hawks. Clara stopped suddenly near the executive floor. "Now, one thing you must know," she said in a hushed voice. "Mr. Harrington, the CEO, is not like most bosses. He doesn't tolerate lateness, unpreparedness, or, well, unnecessary chatter. Just focus on your work, and you'll be fine." Louisa nodded quickly, swallowing hard. "Understood." They walked a little further before Clara pointed at a corner office. The glass walls revealed a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit, standing by the window with a phone pressed to his ear. His shoulders were broad, his posture commanding, and though Louisa couldn't hear his words, the intensity in his expression was unmistakable. "That's him," Clara whispered. "Simon Harrington." Louisa froze for a second. She had expected him to be impressive, but she hadn't expected him to look like that. His sharp jawline, the precise cut of his dark hair, and the way his piercing gray eyes seemed to observe everything. It was overwhelming. For a moment, she forgot to breathe. As if sensing her gaze, Simon turned. Their eyes met through the glass. Louisa quickly looked away, her cheeks burning. By the end of the morning, Louisa was shown to her workstation. She was assigned as an assistant in the marketing division, which meant she would occasionally have to prepare reports for the CEO. It thrilled and terrified her at the same time. Later that day, Louisa stayed focused, determined not to make a bad impression on her very first day. She was still arranging files on her desk when Clara reappeared, holding a stack of documents. "These need to go to Mr. Harrington right away." "Could you take them up?" Clara asked. Louisa hesitated. Delivering files directly to the CEO on day one? But she forced a smile. "Of course." Her heels echoed softly as she made her way up to the top floor. She stopped outside Simon's office, knocked gently, and waited. "Come in," a deep voice responded from inside. Louisa stepped in, careful not to stumble. Simon stood behind his massive oak desk, signing papers. Up close, his presence was even more commanding. His suit fit perfectly, his tie was sharp, and his eyes, those eyes, were cold steel. "Yes?" he asked without looking up. I was asked to deliver these reports," Louisa said, her voice steadier than she felt. Finally, he looked up. His gaze landed on her, and for a moment, he didn't speak. His eyes flickered briefly with surprise. She was not the usual assistant or manager who entered his office. She was young, with soft brown hair that framed her face, eyes that held both determination and vulnerability, and an air of innocence that stood out in this ruthless corporate jungle. Simon cleared his throat, returning to his professional mask. "Place them on the desk," he said simply. Louisa nodded, carefully setting the files down. Her hand trembled slightly, and Simon noticed. "New?" he asked, his tone clipped. "Yes, sir." "First day." He studied her for a second longer than necessary. "Then let me give you one piece of advice, Miss Carter." Louisa Carter. "Miss Carter," he continued, "at Harrington Enterprises, mistakes are not forgiven easily. Work hard, stay focused, and you'll survive here." His words were meant to be stern, but Louisa caught a flicker of something softer in his expression, like he was testing her. She lifted her chin slightly and replied, "Understood, Mr. Harrington. I won't let mistakes define me." Simon raised an eyebrow. Bold. Most new employees nodded silently and left. This one dared to answer back, respectfully but firmly. "Interesting." "Good," he said finally, turning back to his papers. "You may go." Louisa left the office, her heart pounding. She felt both intimidated and strangely intrigued. She couldn't decide if she admired him or if she should stay as far away as possible. That evening, most employees had already gone home when Louisa finished organizing her final report. She glanced at the time, 7:45 p.m. The office was almost empty, yet the light in Simon's office was still on. Curiosity tugged at her. She passed by his door quietly and caught a glimpse inside. He was still at his desk, sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened, his hair slightly mussed. For the first time, he didn't look like the untouchable CEO. He looked human, almost lonely. Louisa found herself smiling faintly before she hurried away. She didn't know then, but that small moment, the way she saw him not as a ruthless CEO, but as a man, would change everything. The next week at Harrington Enterprises felt like a whirlwind for Louisa. She was still adjusting to the pace, the endless meetings and the mountain of reports. Yet every time she passed Simon's office, she couldn't stop herself from sneaking a glance. His presence had an invisible pull, and though she tried to ignore it, she couldn't deny the quickening of her heartbeat whenever their paths crossed. Simon, on the other hand, had taken notice of her far more than he intended. At first, she was just another employee, bright, nervous, eager to prove herself. But there was something about Louisa that lingered in his thoughts. Maybe it was the way she smiled politely even when stressed, or the quiet determination in her eyes when she presented a task. Unlike others who tried to impress him, she didn't fawn over him. She simply worked, and that intrigued him. Late night work. One evening, Louisa was asked to stay late to finish preparing a marketing proposal. The office was nearly deserted, the glow of desk lamps replacing the harsh fluorescent lights. Papers were spread across her desk, her pen tapping against the page as she calculated figures. Her stomach growled softly. She hadn't eaten since lunch, but she was determined to finish before leaving. She sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Still here?" The deep voice startled her. She looked up to see Simon standing by her desk, his jacket draped over his arm, his shirt sleeves rolled up, the faintest shadow of stubble on his jaw. He looked less like the commanding CEO and more like a man caught between exhaustion and discipline. "Yes, sir," Louisa replied quickly, straightening her papers. "I was asked to finalize this proposal for tomorrow's meeting." Simon glanced at the files, then at her. "Most employees don't last this long on their first week." "I don't want to be most employees," she said softly, almost before realizing the boldness of her words. For a second, Simon's lips curved into something dangerously close to a smile. "Good answer." He set his jacket down on the back of a nearby chair and leaned slightly against her desk. The nearness made Louisa's breath hitch. "You haven't eaten," he observed, his sharp eyes noticing the untouched coffee cup beside her. "I'll be fine," she said quickly, though her stomach betrayed her with another small growl. Simon chuckled quietly, an unexpected warm sound that made Louisa's cheeks heat. "Come with me." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "It's nearly 9. There's a small restaurant down the street. You won't get good work done on an empty stomach." His tone was casual, but his eyes carried an unspoken challenge. Louisa hesitated. Having dinner with the CEO felt impossible, inappropriate even, yet there was something in the way he said it, gentle but firm, that made her nod without thinking. All right, dinner. The restaurant was small, tucked away, and far removed from the luxury places one would expect a CEO to frequent. They sat at a quiet corner table, the dim lighting casting shadows across Simon's strong features. Louisa ordered something simple, while Simon asked for the same without even glancing at the menu. For a while, they ate in silence. Louisa tried not to fidget, unsure of what to say, but Simon, watching her from across the table, finally broke the silence. "You surprise me, Miss Carter." Louisa blinked, setting down her fork. "Surprise you? Most new employees tread carefully around me. They avoid eye contact, avoid speaking unless spoken to. But you," he paused, studying her with those piercing gray eyes. "You speak your mind." Even if just a little, Louisa's heart raced. "I don't mean to be disrespectful. I just believe in doing my best." "And you think speaking your mind is part of that?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. Her lips curved into a small smile. "Sometimes silence can be more dangerous than words." Simon's eyes softened for a moment, as though her words touched something deeper in him. He didn't respond right away, but instead leaned back in his chair, studying her like a puzzle he was slowly solving. For Louisa, the evening felt surreal. The powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms was here, sitting across from her, listening intently as though her words mattered. And for Simon, the young woman across from him was unlike anyone he had met in years. She didn't flatter him, didn't fear him. She simply existed as herself, and that somehow felt refreshing. The rain. When they left the restaurant, the city had transformed under a sudden downpour. The rain hammered against the pavement, and Louisa let out a small gasp. "Oh no, I didn't bring an umbrella." Simon glanced at her, then without hesitation, shrugged off his jacket and held it over her head. The sudden closeness, the warmth of his body just beside hers, sent a rush of shivers down her spine. "You'll get wet," she protested softly. "I'll survive," he replied calmly, his voice low and steady. They hurried to his car, the sound of the rain muffling the world around them. When they finally reached it, Louisa was breathless, not from the run, but from the strange flutter inside her chest. Simon drove her home, the soft hum of the engine filling the silence between them. Louisa glanced at him once, catching the way his jaw clenched as though he was fighting thoughts he wouldn't allow himself to voice. When the car stopped in front of her apartment, Louisa turned to thank him, but the words caught in her throat when she met his eyes. For a brief moment, the air between them felt charged, unspoken, dangerous, intoxicating. "Good night, Miss Carter," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "Good night, Mr. Harrington," she whispered back, stepping out into the rain. As he watched her disappear into the building, Simon exhaled slowly. He hadn't meant for dinner to feel like anything more than kindness toward a hard-working employee. Yet as her smile lingered in his mind, he knew this was no longer just business. The quiet shift. The days that followed brought subtle changes neither of them could deny. Simon began noticing small details about Louisa. How she chewed on her pen when concentrating, how she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous, how her laughter was rare but genuine. And Louisa found herself drawn to him in ways she didn't understand. She noticed when he arrived earlier than everyone else, when he stayed long after midnight, and the rare fleeting moments when his stern facade cracked, revealing glimpses of the man behind the CEO. One evening, Louisa caught herself writing his name absent-mindedly in the margin of her notebook. She quickly scribbled it out, her cheeks warming. "This is dangerous," she told herself. "He's my boss. He's untouchable." But her heart refused to listen. The weeks slipped by, and the unspoken connection between Simon and Louisa grew stronger with every passing day. It wasn't obvious, not to the casual observer, but those who paid attention could see the subtle shift. Simon's eyes lingered a moment longer when Louisa entered the room. His voice softened when he spoke to her, in a way it never did with others. And Louisa, though careful, carried a quiet glow whenever she walked out of his office, as though his presence lit something inside her she couldn't hide. But the higher the flame burned, the darker the shadows grew. The whisper of gossip office corridors had a way of carrying whispers, and soon those whispers began to revolve around Louisa. Have you noticed how often she's in the CEO's office? One woman murmured near the break room. She's new, yet already working late nights with him. Suspicious, isn't it? Another replied with a knowing smirk. Louisa heard them one morning, though they fell silent the instant she walked in. The sting of their judgment pricked at her confidence. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was simply working hard. But still, the idea that people thought she was using Simon for favor, it hurt. That afternoon, while preparing documents for the board meeting, she found herself distracted, her mind circling the cruel words. She didn't notice Simon enter the room until his voice broke through her thoughts. "You look troubled," he said quietly. Louisa startled, then quickly shook her head. "It's nothing. Just tired, I suppose." Simon studied her for a moment, his sharp eyes seeing more than she wanted him to. "If someone is making things difficult for you, I need to know." Her heart raced. Part of her wanted to confess about the gossip, about how unfair it felt, but she hesitated. "If I tell him, won't it sound like I care too much about what others think?" Instead, she forced a smile. "I can handle it." Simon's jaw tightened slightly. He wanted to push further, but he stopped himself. He wasn't sure why her struggles mattered so much to him, but they did. The other woman. It was at a company gala that the tension reached its peak. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, champagne glasses clinked, and music floated through the air. Louisa, in a simple navy dress, stood by the corner, watching the dazzling crowd. Simon entered the room like a storm contained in silk. Black tuxedo, sharp gaze, presence so commanding that heads turned as he walked in. Louisa's breath caught, but her admiration quickly soured when she saw the woman on his arm. Victoria Sterling. She was elegant, confident, and impossibly beautiful. The daughter of a powerful investor and someone who had made no secret of her interest in Simon. Tonight she clung to him as though she already belonged at his side. Louisa tried not to stare, but every laugh Victoria shared with Simon felt like a twist in her chest. When Victoria leaned in, whispering something that made Simon's lips curve into a rare smile, Louisa looked away, forcing herself to focus on the glass of champagne in her hand. But Simon noticed her. Even with the weight of investors, executives, and socialites around him, his gaze sought Louisa across the room. She stood alone, her eyes clouded, her posture stiff. Something in his chest tightened, but before he could move, Victoria's hand slid across his arm, pulling him back into conversation. Misunderstandings. Later that night, as Louisa stepped out onto the balcony to catch her breath, she was startled to find Simon already there, standing with his tie loosened, gazing out at the city lights. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said softly, turning as if to leave. "Stay," Simon replied, his voice low, almost weary. For a moment they stood in silence, the cool night air between them. Then Simon turned, his eyes finding hers. "You've been avoiding me." Louisa's heart stuttered. "No, I haven't. I've just been busy." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Busy? Or bothered?" She swallowed hard. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," he said firmly, stepping closer. "You saw Victoria tonight." Louisa's chest tightened. "It's none of my business who you bring to these events, Mr. Harrington." The title, so formal, so distant, cut deeper than she intended. Simon's jaw clenched. "So that's how you see it? Just business?" Her throat ached. She wanted to tell him everything, the gossip, the jealousy, the way her heart twisted whenever she saw him with someone else. But fear held her back. Fear of admitting too much. Fear of what it would mean. "It's safer that way," she whispered. Simon's eyes darkened, his voice quieter but sharper. "Safer for whom?" Before she could answer, the balcony door opened, and Victoria's voice rang out, sweet and commanding. "Simon, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." Simon's gaze lingered on Louisa for a long, burning moment. Then he turned, letting Victoria slip her arm through his once again. Louisa's heart cracked silently as she watched him walk away. The distance. The days that followed were heavy with unspoken tension. Louisa threw herself into her work, avoiding Simon's gaze whenever possible. And Simon, though his eyes sought her constantly, kept his distance. He told himself it was better this way, that whatever pulled him toward her was dangerous, reckless. But at night, alone in his penthouse, he thought of her. He remembered her laughter, her determination, the way she looked at him, not as a CEO, but as a man, and it haunted him. Louisa, in her small apartment, hugged her pillow tightly, telling herself to forget the way his eyes softened when he spoke to her, to forget the warmth she felt under his jacket in the rain. But no matter how hard she tried, Simon Harrington lived in her heart, refusing to leave. And though neither of them said it aloud, both knew they were already too deep. The days of silence between Simon and Louisa stretched like an endless storm. The office buzzed with routine, but for them, every interaction was laced with tension. Louisa avoided his gaze, her words clipped and professional. And Simon, though his chest ached each time she walked past, forced himself to remain the untouchable CEO. But walls, no matter how tall, eventually crack. Breaking point one Friday evening, Louisa stayed late once again, finishing reports that needed to be on Simon's desk by Monday morning. The office was quiet, the hum of the city far below the only sound. She carried the neatly stacked files to his office, hesitating before knocking. When his deep voice called, "Come in," she pushed the door open. Simon was at his desk, tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled from running his hand through it. His eyes lifted when she entered, and for a brief moment, the coldness melted. "Thank you," he said, taking the files from her. His fingers brushed hers lightly, and the spark that leapt between them was undeniable. Both froze. Louisa drew her hand back quickly. "I'll let you get back to work." She turned toward the door, but his voice stopped her. "Louisa." Her name, spoken softly, carried a weight she couldn't ignore. She turned back, her heart racing. Simon stood now, his expression unreadable. "Why have you been avoiding me?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. She tried to compose herself. "I haven't. I've been busy." "That's not true," he said firmly, stepping closer. His gaze was intense, searching. Something changed that night at the gala. "Tell me why." Louisa's throat tightened. The words she had buried for weeks fought to surface. Finally, she whispered, "Because it hurt, Simon. Seeing you with her, it hurt more than it should have." The raw honesty in her voice stunned him. He closed the distance between them, his breath mingling with hers. "Victoria means nothing to me. Nothing. Do you understand?" Louisa blinked, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Then why let her stay so close?" "Because it was easier than admitting the truth," he said, his voice rough. "Easier than facing how much I want you." The confession hung between them like electricity. Louisa's eyes widened, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Simon." He reached up, his hand brushing gently against her cheek. For once, his touch wasn't commanding. It was tender, vulnerable. "You're not just another employee to me. From the moment you walked into this company, you've been under my skin, and I've been fighting it. God knows I've been fighting it." Tears pricked at Louisa's eyes. I thought I was just imagining it." "You weren't," he whispered. "But if this is wrong, if I'm crossing a line, you have to tell me to stop." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them. Then Louisa shook her head, her hand reaching to cover his. "Don't stop." And with that, the walls crumbled. The kiss, Simon lowered his lips to hers, and the world seemed to fall away. The kiss was deep, desperate, years of restraint unraveling in a single moment. Louisa melted against him, her fingers clutching his shirt as though anchoring herself in the storm of emotions. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Simon rested his forehead against hers, his voice low. "Tell me this isn't just me. Tell me you feel it too." Louisa smiled through tears, her voice trembling but certain. "I feel it. I've felt it from the start." A new beginning. The days that followed were different. They still maintained professionalism in the office. But in quiet moments, in the stolen glances, in the way Simon's hand brushed hers when no one was looking, their secret bond deepened. The gossip in the corridors didn't stop, but Louisa no longer cared. What mattered was the truth between them, the honesty they had finally embraced. One evening, weeks later, Simon asked Louisa to meet him on the rooftop of the Harrington Enterprises building. She arrived to find him waiting, the city lights glowing beneath them, the night air cool and calm. He turned, his gray eyes softer than she had ever seen. In his hand, he held a small velvet box. "Louisa Carter," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You walked into my life and shattered every wall I built around my heart. You reminded me that I'm more than a CEO. I'm a man who can love. And I do. I love you." Louisa's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling freely. Simon opened the box to reveal a delicate silver ring. Not extravagant, but elegant, meaningful. "I don't care what the world says or what anyone thinks. I want you by my side in this life and every life. Will you be mine?" Louisa stepped forward, her hands trembling as she touched his face. "Yes, Simon. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when he kissed her under the blanket of stars, it felt like the world itself had conspired to bring them here. For the first time in a long time, Simon Harrington wasn't just the untouchable CEO. He was a man in love. And Louisa, against every odd, had found her forever in him. Months later, Harrington Enterprises still thrived, but within its glass walls, a quiet legend grew. Employees whispered about how their cold, distant CEO had changed, how his eyes lit up when a certain young woman entered the room. And though Simon and Louisa kept most of their love private, one thing was undeniable. In the middle of a ruthless corporate world, they had found something rare, something pure, something worth risking everything for.